Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I thought that I would share my labor and delivery story. Little man is 1 week old and in bless you. So today is September 26th when I'm filming this. September 10th around like 8 o'clock I started having some contractions and they were pretty consistent, but they were really only in my stomach. So I, of course, at that point had no idea what labor contractions felt like. They were not true labor contractions, they were prodromal labor. I did not know that at the time. Based on that, because I had been contracting for several hours at that point and I had had pretty severe Braxton Hicks contractions on and off. I'd been having contractions on and off for a while at this point, like multiple days. We did decide to go ahead and go on early maternity leave just for my safety and his safety, just to make sure that everybody was good. So I had been on maternity leave for about a week before I started really going into contractions. Sunday the 15th, Dave and I were watching Sunday Night Football and I was bouncing on my birth ball because I was getting a little bit uncomfortable and Molly was actually acting really weird. She kept like coming over to me, she kept pacing, and she just seemed not like sad, but just different and not really on alert. It was just, she had a weird vibe to her. And I started feeling contractions that were more like period cramps rather than just my stomach tightening. And they weren't really timeable at that point. They were anywhere from 30 minutes apart to 2 minutes apart and just like all over the place. At this point, I had been contracting on and off every single day for a week and I was just exhausted. So I ended up going to bed around like 9 or 10 o'clock. Then I woke up Monday morning and my cramps were getting more intense, not to the point where like I couldn't talk through them, but I definitely noticed them. And they were starting to get more timeable. They were about 10 minutes apart though. So I was contracting for about 4 hours-ish and they just kept getting closer and closer together and stronger, but like I said, I could still like talk through them. Once we got to triage, they checked my cervix and I was not dilated at all. The week before I had a doctor's appointment and I had my 38-week appointment and I was only 50% effaced. I hadn't been dilating or anything like that. So to hear that I had been contracting and I'd had prodromal labor the week before, I was really discouraged that like nothing had progressed. So they were like, let's give you an hour and see like how far along you progress, and then we'll decide like if we're, sending you home or not. I hung out for an hour in triage and they checked me again and I still was 50% effaced. She could feel his head, but I was not dilated at all and I was not, like, my contractions weren't progressing anything. So they did decide to go ahead and send me home, but they were saying, we really think that you're in early labor and that we'll probably be seeing you later today. And so they told me a couple of things. They were like, if they get, really more intense, can't talk through them. And if they get like 3 to 5 minutes apart, if you have bloody show or if your water breaks, that's automatic, come back. So I was like, okay, cool. The drive home, I did cry. I was very discouraged because I was just so ready to meet him and already so exhausted. I had been contracting, like I said, on and off for so long. It was really getting to me mentally and it was just really hard to be sent home. So we got home and I did pretty much everything I could do to progress my labor. I was on the ball, I was doing the mile circuit, I was walking around because they kept telling me like walk around for an hour, like walking will really help. So I was being as active as I possibly could. 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I think. It may have been a little bit earlier, I can't remember, but it was sometime in the early afternoon, like between 1 and 3. I went to the bathroom and there was bloody show. And so I was like, okay. I came out and I was like, they did say like if I have bloody show to come back, and he was like, yeah, like that was like we're good. We're like things are progressing. And we were thinking that he was gonna come that day. So we called again. We were like, they said if I had bloody show to come back, I have bloody show, what do you want me to do? And I had called every time I was calling my doctor's office, and the nurse would check with my doctor, and then my doctor would go ahead and put it into triage for me. And so my doctor was like, yes, go back. Went back to triage and got checked, and I was still 50% effaced, not dilated at all, which was really annoying because I was like, well, I came back because you said to come back if I'm seeing these and you would admit me, and they weren't going to admit me. So they let me stay for an hour, and they told me to walk the halls, do some lunges, all of that. So I walked the hallways. My contractions were also getting pretty painful at that point, to the point where like I did need to like stop and brace myself when I would feel a contraction. And I couldn't really talk through them at all either. And I had started losing like pieces of my mucus plug as well, which they were like, we don't really care about that. So I was like, cool, thanks. Walked around for an hour. I did some lunges, and they checked me again, and I still had not progressed at all. So at this point, I was absolutely exhausted. I had gotten my hopes up twice that I was going into labor, and it was just really discouraging, really heartbreaking. Like, I had my mom come to the hospital and like walk around with me as well, and it was really sad, especially because we kept like informing people like, hey, we're going to the hospital, and then nope, and then hey, we're going to the hospital, and then nope. So I felt like, gosh, are people going to think that I'm like making this up, or are people going to think that, you know, I don't know, just like a bunch of random stuff was going through my head that truly did not matter. But in the moment, I just felt really like guilty for getting everybody like hype and ready when I wasn't progressing at all, which there was no way for me to know that, but I wasn't progressing at all. So we went home, and I just kind of relaxed for the rest of the night, because at that point, like I said, Dave and I were both exhausted. I had been up since 2 and still contracting very regularly. They were like 10 minutes apart, 5 minutes apart. So they kept going like in between that time, but I never stopped contracting. Tuesday, same thing. I was contracting all day long, and Tuesday my contractions were very, very, very painful. I was calling them like a 9 out of 10. They were like that painful. But I pretty much just stayed home all day Tuesday contracting, and it was just brutal. We did have plans to have me induced the Thursday before his due date. So his due date was Friday, September 20th, and we did have plans that I would get induced Thursday at 1 a.m. because of how uncomfortable I was, and that was the earliest induction day that they had. They didn't have on his due date, they didn't have the weekend, and they didn't have the Monday after his due date. And I was like, there's no way that I can continue to contract for a week. Like, I can't do this. Like, my body is done. I can't. And mentally I couldn't. So that's why we picked an earlier induction day, because it was just becoming too much for me. So we knew that Wednesday night would be kind of difficult because we would have to go to the hospital at 1 a.m. like that night essentially. So Tuesday, at like 4 o'clock, I just like threw up my hands, and I was like, okay, at this point, just looks like we're going to get induced Thursday morning, like Wednesday night, Thursday morning. It is what it is. I'm just going to go to bed. So I just went to bed. I felt so defeated because I really, really, really wanted to go into spontaneous labor. I really wanted to have that moment, especially with my first. Like, it was very discouraging and heartbreaking to not have that moment. And I just felt like I was giving up, and I didn't like that feeling. And it was just a very emotionally draining couple of days. Tuesday night, like midnight-ish, I woke up to some pretty severe contractions every 5 minutes for like 2 hours. And I was like, I'm not going to go to the hospital just to be sent home again. So I waited a little bit longer. Around like 5 o'clock, I started timing them at 3 minutes apart. and they were 3 minutes apart for an hour and a half, and they were super, super intense. And I was like, okay, I think this is it. Like, they're 3 minutes apart. They're incredibly intense. They've been this way for well over an hour now. This is it. This is go time. So we again loaded up the car and drove to the hospital. I got checked, and I was still only 50% effaced. I had no cervical change at all. And I was exhausted, and they were like, we can either let you walk around for an hour or we can send you home. And I was like, is there no way that I can just be induced now? Like, I'm coming back here tonight, literally tonight, to get induced. Is there any way that I can just be induced now? Because I don't know how I'm gonna make it through the day. And so they went out and found, like, figured out if they had staffing or anything like that. They actually had to call a nurse in early to a shift, and they kept me, they admitted me, and we started the induction process. I was relieved that we were finally staying and we would not be going home without a baby at that point. So that was like a huge relief. We got my IV in, and then they moved me over to the labor and delivery room, and then they gave me the Cytotec pill. It was supposed to soften my cervix a bit more, so they gave me that. And initially I was like, I do want an epidural, but I'll wait until, like, they get a little bit more intense. And then I was like, I've been contracting for 2 days straight with severe contractions. I just want to rest. So I changed my mind and I got my epidural. My epidural actually was not bad at all. Like, I felt the little prick, like the bee sting prick, but it didn't hurt, probably because of how, like, much pain I was already in. Like, that really didn't bother me. But my epidural went in very quick, very easy, and I instantly felt the epidural working. I could still move my legs, but it was the weirdest sensation to have your legs, like, be that numb to where you're touching them, but you don't, like, you're looking at yourself touching your leg, but you don't realize that you're touching your leg because you don't feel it in your legs. But I instantly just felt so much joy and so much relief because my body was finally able to just relax. And I also think mentally it was really nice because my body was able to relax. They had a monitor on me, so I was being cared for and watched out for, and they had a monitor on him, so I didn't have to worry about anything. I was able to sleep. I was able to just chill and relax, and that was really, really nice. So my nurse was absolutely amazing. I love her so much, and I credit her for how fast, like, the actual induction part went, because she is amazing. I was really scared to get Pitocin early on, and she was like, I don't want to give you Pitocin if I don't have to. So my first Cytotec, I progressed from not 50% effaced and not dilated at all to a 1.5, and she was like, honestly, like, your cervix is so thin, like, I could have stretched you if I wanted to, but I didn't want to do that. So she was like, I'm gonna give you one more round, and I think that that's all we're gonna need. She was like, I'm not gonna give you Pitocin. So she gave me another Cytotec, and then 4 hours later, she kept, like, coming in every 30 minutes, and we would, like, change positions. I would lay on different sides. I was using the peanut ball. She had different, like, positions with the peanut ball. She was like, I'm really big on movement. I want to get you moving. I want to get him in a good position to put pressure on your cervix. So she was on it. She was awesome. The only downside was I hadn't eaten since the night before at like 6 or 7 because I just went to bed early. So I was starving. The only thing that I could eat during my induction process, like once I got the epidural, I could have Jell-O and I could have like the frozen like ice pop things. So that's all I ate. I ate one thing of Jell-O, which was actually really good, and I ate an Italian ice like cup, and I had some apple juice, but that was it. Definitely, if you are getting induced, eat before you get your epidural, because once you get your epidural, you cannot eat, and it was a long day. of not eating. Gave me my second dose, and 4 hours later, she was like, honestly, you're like a 6.5, 7. So I was absolutely elated. But her shift was ending, which was so sad. So then I had new nurses come in, and I really liked both of them as well. Around like 8 o'clock, my progression had stopped. So my contractions, they were still like, I wasn't feeling any contractions at all, but my contractions weren't progressing me beyond that 7. They decided that they were going to go ahead and break my water, which did not hurt at all. Like, I didn't feel it, but feeling your water after it's broken, I was always like, how am I going to know if my water breaks? You'll know. You will know. If your water has broken, you will know. It literally is like gushes at one time coming out of you. It can feel like a little trickle, I guess, but like, it's not always just like that big gush that you see on the movies. For me, it was like gush, trickle, 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 gush, trickle, trickle, trickle. So that was weird. I did not like that sensation, but that's what it felt like if you're curious. So they did decide to put me on Pitocin. So they started me off super, super low. And like I said, at this point, it was like 8:30. They started me on Pitocin to get my contractions going, and they did, but it took forever. It took forever. So they say it takes about an hour per centimeter. So like I said, at that point I was a 7. So I still had 3 centimeters to go. So I still had 3 hours to go. And it was the hardest 3 hours. Like, I can't express. It was painful. Even though I had my epidural, Pitocin contractions are very, very, very intense. And they were intense not because it wasn't the pain that I was expecting. I wanted to push. I wanted to push him out with the Pitocin contractions, especially because they kept upping the Pitocin to like get him pushed down farther, because he was coming down. Like, he was at -2 station, and he was like dropping very well. And so all of that pressure, I felt like I wanted to push. And a lot of people, I had done so much research, a lot of people were like, it feels like you need to poop. Legit feels like you need to poop. So I was like, I actually think that I have to poop. Like, I really think there's poop in there. And she was like, yeah, there probably is. And I was like, I want to push. I want to push it out because it hurt really, really bad. And so what was hard for me was not pushing. It was fighting my body's natural instinct to push. Fighting against that was truly the hardest thing ever. It hurt really bad. I hate to scare you. I hope I'm not scaring you. I was terrified as well, but I just want to be real. Every time I got a contraction, my contractions were like a minute apart. So I would like contract, and then as soon as my contraction was over, I like passed out. Like, fully fell asleep because I was so exhausted. I just remember like holding my husband's hand. I was holding onto the rail of the bed. I was like vocalizing. I was like yelling. It was so hard. And I just begged and begged, like, please can I push? Please can I push? Like, how far like am I? Can I get another cervical check? Because once your water is broken, they don't like to do too many cervical checks anyway, because the increase of risk of infection, but especially once your water breaks, they don't like to do too many cervical checks. So not knowing how long I had to go like this, it was brutal. It was a brutal 3 hours. Finally, like, I got to, I think, an 8 or a 10 on my Pitocin, and I was like, I can't go any higher. Like, this is as high as I can stand, and I can barely stand this, which I really appreciate them respecting me, saying like, I don't want any more of this. This is as high as you can go, because it was so hard. But after, like I said, like 3 hours, around like 11 o'clock, they checked me and they were like, okay, I think we're ready to push soon. So they went and they got my doctor and they got like the room all set up and ready to go. And then everybody like left and it was just one of my nurses and my husband. And I have to say, I appreciate and love my husband so much. We knew, like, obviously we had planned on him being in the room with me when I was pushing and like holding my hand when I was pushing. We did not expect him to be holding my other leg opposite of the nurse and it just be those two. So like my husband saw everything. Saw it all. And I just appreciate him so much. He was so supportive. He was so great. But fair warning, if you get induced, like, and there's only one nurse in there, that means your husband's gonna, or your partner, whoever is gonna be in there with you, is probably gonna hold the other leg. So you may want to ask for backup if you don't have that, or if you don't want that, because we had no idea, but my husband was fine with it. Started pushing and I pushed for 40 minutes. I will say, the epidural, I did feel him coming out completely, and it was very painful. I don't think it was as bad as if I would have went natural, but the epidural doesn't stop like the vaginal pain that you feel. It does everything else. So some people are like, oh, your epidural wears off. Like, I felt it. It's not that it wore off. Like, my epidural was still fully functioning, fully working. It's just that it doesn't do anything vaginally. So there are, I guess, medications that you can ask for that. I don't really know much about them. My nurse had just said, like, if that's an option I wanted, but we never, like, that was so early on in my induction that I didn't even think about it later. But I did feel him fully coming out. The ring of fire is fiery. But yeah, I just pushed him out. I guess I was pushing for, they said 40 minutes. It did not feel like 40 minutes. It felt like I was pushing for like 5 or 10 minutes because of how exhausted I was. But I just pushed on every single contraction, 3 pushes on every contraction. And yeah, he came out at 12:21 in the morning, which I think is so funny because we were supposed to get induced 40 minutes later. Like, the original plan was to get induced 40 minutes later. So he did beat his due date and he did beat his induction date, his original induction date, but he came out. He did not cry when he first came out. So my husband went over, like, with the NICU team. There was meconium in my water, so the NICU team did have to, like, take him over to the warmer and check. So my husband went with him. Sorry, baby. My husband went with him, and he wasn't crying, but he was breathing. His eyes were open. He was moving. Like, lungs sounded good, heart sounded good, and the like main person from NICU came over to me and was like, okay, he hasn't cried, but that's totally fine. He looks great. And then they gave him to me, and it was the most surreal thing ever, having your baby placed on your chest. Like, I have no words. It was so incredibly cool. I had a 2nd degree tear, so I also felt her stitching me up, so they did have to give me morphine and lidocaine. And once they gave me that, I was fine. But yeah, I had a 70-hour, almost 72-hour labor, and it was so exhausting. I was absolutely exhausted afterwards. I was so hungry afterwards. I pretty much ate, like, immediately after giving birth. And I was just so tired. We didn't end up going to sleep until like 4. We got up into our postpartum room, and we ended up staying a little over 24 hours. We got discharged Friday afternoon, and that was really because we were just pushing. We were really ready to go home. We did not want to stay an additional night. The pediatrician on call really wanted us to stay an additional night, but I was like, I passed all my checks, he's passed all his checks, we're good. Like, I don't want to just stay just to stay. We also were going to have my mom stay with us that first night, so I felt comfortable enough to leave. So we did leave. We had to go back on Sunday just to get his weight and his bilirubin checked, which both of those, the weight went down and his bilirubin increased, but so we did have to go back for that because our first appointment wasn't for another couple days after, and they don't like to go that long. But yeah, overall, I had a very good labor experience. Like, it was incredibly long and incredibly tiring mentally, emotionally, and physically. But I will say, especially like the induction process went very quickly. Considering I was a first-time mom, like my induction went very quick, and my nursing staff that were taking care of me were incredible. They were amazing. The lactation consultants at this hospital were amazing. And I honestly had a really positive experience, and I'm just so grateful for that. So yeah, that was my labor and delivery story. I tried to make it as quick as I possibly could, but yeah, little man is knocked out right now, so I'm gonna go ahead and go put him down. I am going to be filming a lot more vlogs, a lot more mom vlogs and newborn vlogs and baby vlogs and all that kind of stuff. So if you're interested in that type of content, subscribe, follow along, and join in on the fun. That was it for this one, guys. I will see you on my next one. Bye.